Hi everyone, this is Counseling 4000, Chapter 9, Asking Questions. When listening to other people talk about their problems, we find ourselves asking a lot of questions. We ask a lot of questions if our listening skills are not that strong. So, an example would be we would ask questions such as, did you have any money? Where did the man say he lived? Instead of saying, tell me more about what happened. We sometimes feel like we need to have answers and we end up asking questions to stall for time. So what that is basically saying is that even though you're asking very specific questions, maybe what you really need to do is just have them talk more about the situation, the overall, so that you get the answers from their stories as opposed to just asking them questions. Because if you imagine someone going, what's your name? How old are you? Are you married? Where do you live? What's your social security card number? And all that stuff, it becomes almost like an interrogation as opposed to a conversation. So instead, you might want to say something, tell me more about what happened during the situation. So that way, that allows the person to talk more and doesn't feel like they have to just keep on answering questions. When questions are important, number one, when you are opening a case or chart for a person and need identifying information. So these would be closed-ended questions. So these are okay to ask, even though sometimes it sounds like, it's an interrogation would be, what is your name? What is your birthday and stuff like that, because you do actually need all that information. Two, when you're compiling information for assessment and referral purposes and need facts to do so properly. So again, these are still closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions, just to remind you all, if you don't know, are questions that can be answered with like a simple response, like I am 23 years old. I am not married. Those things are close-ended. Open-ended questions would be more like, tell me a little bit of how you feel about your wedding. A closed-ended question would be, how old are you? All right, three, when you are encouraging the person to talk about their situation freely to better understand which aspects of it are important to the person. So those would be open-ended. So again, you're encouraging them to talk about the situation. Closed-ended questions, ones that require a single answer, like I said before. Where do you live? And the client might say 436 Pine Street. How long have you lived there? Oh, about 5 years. Have you ever been seen here before? Yes, in 2013. The worker might also say, and who did you see then? And the client says, Dr. Broadwin, an outpatient. And then you might ask, did he prescribe any medication? And then you say, yes, he gave me a prescription for Prozac. Um, and then you would say, do you still take that? And then the client says, no, I stopped a few months ago. So again, you can see how these questions are very short answered responses because it's kind of like a yes or no kind of answer that you're looking for and close-ended. You can also role play on page 188. Asking too many closed-ended questions after another about a person can sound like an interrogation. An interrogation is basically, when you are at the police station and they're trying to ask you questions like in the movies. That's an interrogation with a spotlight on your face. It's a little scary sometimes, and you're kind of a little bit more anxious or paranoid during that time period as well. Open-ended questions. Oprah is probably known as one of the best when it comes to asking conversations. This is why she's had her talk show for so long. Serve the purpose of giving clients more opportunity to talk about what is important to them. The clients can share their feelings, maybe the underlying causes for why they did the things that they did, supporting circumstances, and then also their personal plans, like what are they planning on doing. Not seen as prying, but seen as real interest, because you are empathizing with them as they tell us the story. We're listening to them actively, and we relate to them exactly how they're going, what they're going through. So here's a open-ended question version. Worker can say, can you tell me about the night your father left? See right there, you can't just say, you can say, no, I'm not going to tell you anything, but that's not really what the purpose is, right? It is to actually pull out a long response. So the client might say would be, well, my mother had been arguing with him for some time. I could tell he was getting angry. I don't think I would really blame her for his leaving. He had done many things to her that she had every right to be angry about, but I guess for him it was a last straw. Anyway, we were having dinner and she began on the same topic of the house. He just put down his fork and got up from the table and just walked out of the house. See, all that information, you might want to know what happened. You don't have to say all these sort of things. Just by opening up that thing, what can you tell me about the night before your father left, or the night your father left? and that invites the client to start talking. Another open-ended question would be, can you describe your relationship with him after that, right? And the response would be, well, he did come back to the house for his things from time to time. He got the apartment nearby, and I used to stop there on my way home from school. We never stopped seeing each other, and we never talked about my mother. I can't even remember him asking how she was, or for the matter, saying anything mean about her. So you could have been saying or asking questions like, do you actually see your father now that he left? Do you guys talk about, your mother and all this stuff? But you didn't have to ask all those questions because your open-ended question would have covered it, okay, pretty much. And if not, then you can do a follow-up question that way. Here's a closed-ended version. When did your father leave? And then the client might say, I think August of 2006. Did your parent argue much before he left? Yeah, sure, a lot of times. Why did he go? Well, they disagreed over money and about the house. After he left, where did he go? He got an apartment near us. Did you ever see him after that? Yes, pretty much. So you can sort of see the questions are a lot shorter in responses because the client now is starting to feel as though I'm just not going to talk. I'm going to wait for you to ask me a question. I'm just going to respond because it seems like that's what you want. Whereas if you ask an open-ended question, it allows them to take a second to think about it and then respond meaningfully. Okay, and then you'll get all the answers that you probably need within that as well. Questions that make the other person feel uncomfortable. The trouble with why questions. Why questions imply that you believe the person should have handled things differently. Like, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do this? Why did you choose that? All those things kind of make you feel as though, oh, I'm being accused of doing something wrong at this moment. So I have to justify the reason why I'm doing it. So why questions are not very good. Sometimes they are, depending on the situation. Such as, why didn't you call the police? That is basically saying you should have called the police, but why didn't you, right? And again, it might be other reasons why. So tell me a little bit more about the situation that happened, involving the police maybe or something like that. Why did you spend all that money? Again, that means you probably shouldn't have spent all that money. And then why did you let your children stay out that late? Basically scolding the parent saying, well, you shouldn't let your students or your kids stay out so late. So again, these questions make people defensive, and then they feel like they have to justify or defend themselves. Sometimes why questions seem to seek a level of understanding that the client does not have. So sometimes the client doesn't actually know how to answer the why question. Why do you think you chose to go out to that particular bar? Why was it that you and he had that fight on that evening? Why is it that each of these incidents happened after she was out with her friends? Again, some of these questions you can't find an answer to because I don't know why I decided to choose to go to that bar or the person did, So then they're like, oh, now I feel stupid because I don't even know why. I'm dumb. Why did I think about going there? All those things might race into that person's mind. And then, of course, that's not going to be very good either. And it sounds like you're prying for information. Why did you have a fourth child so soon after the third one? Why didn't you ask yourself why you chose to do it that way? Why are you always avoiding going to college to get some information? Again, see how it seems as though that person's kind of accusing in a negative way. Asking multiple questions. Did you see the other person? What did he look like? Did you get a license plate number or something identifying information? How close were you? Did anyone else have any information that would identify him? Did the police have any suggestions? Instead, you just want to say something like, tell me what happened that night. And that way it answers all those questions as that person is telling their story. You can keep on saying, tell me more, and stuff like that, and then they can continue to talk. But if you did all those questions, again, they feel like they're not comfortable. They just want to answer your questions so they can get it over with. Questions that change the subject. If a person is talking about how she learned of her mother's death, do not start asking questions about her mother's prearranged funeral because she's talking about her mother's death, not about the side stuff that she has to do, the admin or the interviews or whatever she has to do. Instead, focus on when she was finding out about her mother's death. Ask questions that stay on the topic the client has selected. So here are some questions where we might have started off with one, right? Because let's say the client brought it up, but then you decide to change the topic. I heard about the kids before, but where do you work? Or, so she died on Saturday and now you're seeing a lawyer about the will? Or, that's real neat about how your car looked before the accident. Do you have adequate car insurance? Or, so your mother died on Saturday and you're living in a house by yourself. See how these things are all kind of related, but not really. So you still want to focus on their feelings, connecting with the client, letting them know that they have been heard by you, not that you're going to move on to the next thing. We know that some of this stuff you have to do, right? It's obvious, again, but you want to spend some time to be with that person emotionally, psychologically first, before you start doing all the other work, so that you know that they're prepared, they're ready by understanding their body language, their tone of voice, and all that other stuff. Implying there is only one answer to your question. So obviously, as we've gone through this book and you've gone through the rehab program, you understand that there's actually multiple things that could happen, right? So when you imply that there's only one way to do it, that's really not true. And that can make the client feel like they're being accused of doing something wrong. And then maybe they did do something wrong, but that's not the point of why you're there, right? You're there to help them out because they've come to you to seek out solutions and stuff. So example would be, didn't you go to the police? Obviously, the answer should have been yes, probably, but maybe there are reasons why they didn't go, right? And so we want to hear about that part. So you might say something like, tell me a little bit more about what happened last night. And then from there, maybe they'll justify, maybe they'll tell you the reason why they were not able to do those things. Because sometimes, even though you think that they should have done it, it doesn't mean that they can't, right? Sometimes my students don't necessarily ask the right questions, but part of that is because maybe they feel really scared of the boss or the supervisor, so they can't bring it up, or they don't want to bring it up because of that. And that's a legitimate reason why they might not have brought it up, even though that was probably the bad answer. So we want to hear, though, and understand why they did the things that they did, and not necessarily blame them. The example is, did you tell the other person what you had heard? And did you see to it that he knew what you were thinking? Again, these are things that kind of sound accusatory, like, why didn't you do that? You should have done that. Again, the thing has already happened. What's the point of blaming the history, the past? Instead, let's work on the future and the current time. Inflicting your values on your client, you can also ask questions based on your own value systems, while your client may have other values. For example, did you tell her how you felt before you just walked out? So for you, maybe you feel like you need to be clear and open about these things, but maybe that person could not or did not have the opportunity to do the same thing. So they don't. So by saying this, you're actually pushing like, well, you should have behaved more like me, right? And let's be honest, everyone behaves differently. So we have to understand where they're coming from. That empathy word is here again. Another example would be, did you tell her the complete truth? Because you feel like, you are always telling the truth or whatever. But, sometimes people have to lie to survive. Don't you value truth above everything else in this situation? Again, that is a moral based, value judgment, right? So again, not everyone's going to agree with the way that you think. So you have to be aware of when you ask questions that are like that. Do not ask questions that make assumptions. So such as, assumption is basically kind of like maybe thinking that it's going to happen, but, so you don't want to ask those types of questions. You want to ask more direct questions so that instead of saying, you called the police, right? Or you wanted to go to the store, didn't you? Or he was being a fool, wasn't he? Again, these things are kind of like you're accusing someone of something, and that's not necessarily something that's maybe accurate at all. Again, so what's the point of just hearing about an opinion that way? It really doesn't, make a big difference or a change. Figure 9.1 on page 193, formula for asking open-ended questions. Here are some openers, can you or could you, and then directives we share, describe, explain, summarize, outline, could you spell out, could you talk, could you give me, blah, blah, blah. And then add-ons or softeners are a little bit more about, a little bit about, a little more about, something about, the problems with, the larger picture, a little more about. So, these are things that encourage you to talk a little bit more. And then, of course, the object of the question is what you really want to know about, which is like, can you share a little bit more about your husband, your childhood, your medication, what the move was like? So these things allows them to then talk a huge amount so that you don't have to sit there and just keep on asking questions. Incorrect. Tell me a little bit about how you found out about your husband's cheating. Instead, you want to say something like, tell me about finding out about your husband. Because if they're there to talk about the cheating, you don't need to bring it up again, right? So let them explain it to you exactly what happened. Incorrect would be, can you describe why you left him? Instead saying, can you describe him leaving? Okay. And then incorrect would be, could you tell me a little bit about what the doctor said? Instead, you could say, could you tell me a little bit about visiting the doctor? So that way they can tell you from their viewpoint what happened, what their truth was. Incorrect, can you summarize for me when you left? Instead saying something like, can you tell me about leaving? Again, the question is a lot shorter, but it allows that person to then go into a whole conversation about it. Incorrect would be, tell me a little bit more about where you were that night. Instead say, tell me more about that night, or tell me a bit more about that night. So that way, again, we already know that they're going to be there, so you don't need to say that, right? So learn how to reduce your questions and allow that person to have an open-ended response to this. Again, this is really hard. I want you guys to start practicing when you guys go out and party and meet people, or when you talk to your friends about problems, to be able to shorten it to allow them to just keep on talking. Allow them to talk about a paragraph, like 4 or 5 sentences. It's not like, what is your age? 24. When were you born? January 1st, 1999 or whatever, right? Again, those things is kind of like a give it back and take all the time. Instead, we want to have a meaningful, thoughtful conversation where the client is feeling like they can speak openly about how they're thinking and what they're feeling. Less information. I was down by the railroad tracks. I thought I could hop on a freight or something like that. I just wanted to get away. But more information might be, I was feeling terrified. I didn't know who these people were or where they had singled me, why they had singled me out. I didn't know what to do or where to go, so I went down by the railroad tracks. I thought I could jump a freight or something like that. I just wanted to get away. I saw it starting to get light. No one came, and I finally got up and snuck home. Yeah. So you can sort of see how much more information you can get if you allow them to really talk about whatever they want to choose to talk about when it comes to a specific topic. There's open-ended question complement reflective listening, and you can role play on page 194 to 195.